a while, the Global South Learning Ecosystems Research Project, which has reached the end of its first phase and is now ready to sort of give an early readout on what our conclusions are on this critical topic. I'm going to be handing over to my colleague, Valerie Hannon, who I see has just joined us. Valerie and I are the co-chairs of the Global Education Leaders Program. And Valerie is going to be setting out through slides our major conclusions over the next few minutes with a bit of help from me. And then I'd like to facilitate a conversation with all of you, if that's okay. First with some of the ecosystem leaders who've been part of our study, and then with everybody on the call, as we hope your thoughts and questions are stimulated. Maybe just before we launch in with Valerie, I could just offer a few introductions from the people who've been leading the work. I'll come to Valerie herself in a moment. But Leonora, if you'd introduce yourself.
Hello, everybody. It's lovely to see you. I am with the Learning Planet Alliance, organising the festival. I think I know most of you, but for those of you who I don't, I'm delighted to have you here. And I've been working with Valerie and Michael on this project for the last year. I'll stop there, but do check out the rest of the festival sessions. Many of you are organising your own, so thank you very much for that. And I look forward to hearing some of your thoughts during this session. Thank you.
Thank you. And Olivier, your turn.
Thank you. Very quickly. So I'm Olivier, I'm director of the Learning Planet Alliance. So it's a warm welcome. Very pleased that you are all here to participate in this important session. And just to let you know, there are more than 630 events being organized worldwide in partnerships with 500 partners during the festival. And we already have tens of thousands of participants from more than 184 countries precisely. So welcome, and do check the rest of the festival, but really let's get into the Global South Learning Ecosystems.
Thank you, Olivier. So thanks for joining us. Don't let that stop you doing the other 599. And with that, let me pass to Valerie, who will lead us through the slides. Valerie.
Thank you, Michael, and hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this session. I hope my later arrival didn't hold things up, but I'm going to be responsible for giving you a kind of brief introduction to this work, which, as Leonora said, we've been looking at, we've been thinking about and exploring and researching for the last year. So I'm going to use the dreaded words. I'm going to share my screen now, which I hope you can see. Take this to full screen. This is very much a preview. We're still deep in the weeds of preparing and completing this report, but let me give you some sense of what we've done, but most of all, starting off with why we think it's important. The background to this was that we launched it in 22 on the back of work being done worldwide about the notion of learning ecosystems. And what we were trying to do was to surface some new insights and different methodologies that advance our global understanding of what local ecosystems are and might be. We define them, in case you're wondering, as, and this is the critical point, diverse combinations of the providers, both formal and informal and non-formal, businesses, community organizations, as well as government agencies. And the important thing is that they are creating completely new learning opportunities and pathways to thriving. That word we will come back to. So we have been looking at ecosystems that have thriving and equity and learner agency at the very heart of what they do. And I lead with that because we are interested in these phenomena, not just as, curiosities, but as, in our view, holding one key to a new paradigm for learning, the whole essence of what the Learning Planet Institute Festival is about. And we believe that just following the old model of what has been prevalent in formal learning systems will not be sufficient to take us to where we need to be in terms of education's task in the future of humanity. So that's why we think this is important. And I'm trying to move this on. Sorry. We started by conducting a global survey. We were interested, as the title suggests, in the Global South, because a great deal has already been written about ecosystems in the global north. And we thought there was something really significant to be explored in what is happening in conditions, not just of sometimes poverty and difficulty, but serious adversity. So we chose Latin America, Africa, India, and Indonesia, and our scan threw up around 100 identified global learning ecosystems. We took a view and shortlisted around about 20 of those and created short vignettes, which will appear in the report. And then we did a slightly deeper dive into 11 leading exemplars. And then we convened the local leaders and the representatives of those ecosystems for an exploratory inquiry. Let me say straight away what a privilege it was to work with some of those local leaders. We all learned a great deal, and I felt personally full of admiration for the inspirational leadership that they're giving. So I won't go through those, but there you can see where our 11 are located and who they are. There'll be contact details in the report, so if any of you would like to follow up and find out a bit more, you can be able to do that. They were chosen, again, as I say, because we felt that these in particular had specific features and characteristics which might hold the key to part of the shift in the learning paradigm, the pedagogical model that we want to explore further, and which we think holds great promise. So let me briefly go through some of the insights that turned up. First of all is the importance of context. Again and again, we were struck by how understanding what thriving might be in the 21st century and human flourishing are deeply embedded in local contexts. You may feel that's a blindingly obvious insight, but actually it's a quite profound one, we believe. All our exemplar ecosystems were orientating around more expansive purposes and ambitions and thinking about future generations and not just the present. And adverse environments and life experiences give a sense of the complexity of all of this and how systemic and multi-layered the problems are. It's a case that no single actor, no form of institution or single institution itself can solve these. The most ambitious learning ecosystems see themselves not just as supplementary education programs, filling in the deficits, but rather having the potential to evolve and transform the system itself. There, after all, is where the big bucks, where the huge sums of public money are invested. And this is there that we must, in the end, make some kind of impact and not allow that just to continue unchallenged and unchanged. But to do that, clearly, they must themselves create powerful and impactful programs. And that's what they've set about doing. And that's what we specifically tried to explore. But as I say again, they were honed to address adversity or adversities. And that can take many different shapes. So yes, poverty is so frequently a feature, but in addition to that, you might be looking at post-Civil War conditions or people who are in refugee circumstances or addressing gang violence, often as a result of drug cultures, which have been perhaps a legacy of post-colonial environments. So the specificity of the adversity was something that we were very struck by. So the kinds of approaches that needed to be adopted were, first of all, changing the mindset, changing the public story about what education is for and critically might be. And to do that, and alongside it, there needed to be a major capacity building effort amongst teachers. Just ignoring the teaching profession and allow the preparation and the development of teachers to be conducted by the university or by the colleges seems now completely insufficient. And it needs alliances and the creation of sophisticated forms of networks and partnerships. But our informants told us that many more ingredients were needed as well. And we were very struck by the way in which they set about building trust, giving a huge investment of time into creating trust within communities, between parts of communities, using really intelligently research evidence and data, not just to demonstrate impact or to seek out and track down and nail the next grant, but for learning itself, for changing mindsets within communities. And it might be that you'll hear two of our participants talk about the way in which they have regularly collected data to give back to communities, for the community itself to interrogate and think what they might do with it. And then intelligent, generative relationships with the system itself. Those need to be, good personal relationships, but systemic relationships as well. How the formal system is brought on board and is led to understand what is going on in these unusual circumstances. Well, what have we heard that convinces us yet further that ecosystems are the way forward? We believe that children and young people badly need additional skills to respond to adversity. It's not just the foundational competencies of literacy and numeracy and scientific thinking. They need 21st century competencies related to real life and the real life that they are inhabiting in their communities. And they need a sense of belonging to something bigger than themselves. And we think that education solutions can't be linear or homogeneous, one size fits all. People have very, very different experiences in and of adversity, and our organizations are seeking to reflect that. Ecosystems are about system building from the ground up. Excuse me. Building together with everyone who is involved with the development of the child. And critically, that's parents and carers and micro communities, as well as providers. And no one organization can develop all the expertise or offer the range of programs that are needed to help a child thrive. So I think the heart of a learning ecosystem is recognizing the way in which there are assets, sequestered assets within communities that they can bring to bear if people start to coalesce around a shared purpose to achieve common goals. So some of the approaches that our respondents identified in terms of working with government and policymakers and building those relationships were the smart use of secondments, if you like, infiltrating the system and infiltrating the intelligence and the insights within the formal system. Obviously, using demonstration projects and pilots to demonstrate impact and show what really sometimes quite modest investment can achieve. You can't underestimate the importance of sustained collaborative advocacy. We say collaborative advocacy because it's not just emanating from one source, it needs many voices. And also the creation of multi-stakeholder teams, bringing people from within formal systems, within government, into teams to work alongside the ecosystem itself. We inquired of the learning ecosystem leaders what they actually needed to really accelerate the progress they are making and to get over the obstructions and the frustrations. They needed, they felt, a steady engagement with the system. That is to say, a regular dialogue, feeling in a sense that they are part of the debate, part of the dialogue, part of the conversation. And they work towards trying to engineer that. That amounts to a seat at the table, really, a debate about how to drive change. They felt that they needed interest from government in prototyping innovation, not just talking about, a given process that's going to be scaled, but interest in something which is more emergent, something which perhaps that doesn't necessarily have yet demonstrated results, but interest in government in all the processes of innovation and being prepared to invest in that. If you compare other sectors to the education sector in terms of what is spent on research and development, education comes right down the bottom. Almost every other sector is a multiple of 10, sometimes 20 times what education spends on innovation. Well, here is one space where that ought to be rectified. They need to help in advocacy and donor recognition so that donors don't have fixed views about what it's worth investing in. They need more shared intelligence about how to make changes sustainable, particularly when leaders change, when personnel change, and looking at it over time, over a considerable period of time. And they need from others an openness to revisit assumptions about what counts as learning, what counts as education, and what is valuable. So we are going to be setting out these needs and the implications of them in our report with some suggestions about how they might be addressed. And Michael, I think I'll turn over to you now to think about the policymakers' perspective as we had a debate with them in the localities that we studied.
Thanks, Valerie. Yes, we spoke to education ministers, municipal leaders, other key players across Latin America, Northwest Africa, India and Indonesia. And perhaps they were self-selecting, obviously, in the sense that they are themselves political and policy leaders in places where these movements are moving forward. But nevertheless, there was a lot of nuance in what they said. Broadly speaking, you're more likely to find a passion for new purposes, people and practices in education in the global south, I think, than you are in the global north. There's a powerful call for doing things differently, leapfrogging, whatever you call it. I think there's a recognition, and this came from discussions with Ghana, that it's the learning ecosystem rather than the classical formal school system that opens the door to the living system, the whole child. But these are hard-headed policymakers. They don't just want to bankroll tomorrow's bright wheeze. They want to see highly intentional design that intelligently picks up what's going on in the best learning ecosystems around the world. They want, of course, to see evidence and data on which they can base decisions. And they'd be very grateful, usually, for somebody else's seed corn funding before they pile in resources typically given to formal education. It was interesting that so many wanted to move learning ecosystems forward, not only within their own country, but on an international backing, on an international basis. There's comfort in the group, I think, to learn from one another, maybe to find ways to scale globally, and that will be an important part of this work moving forward. But I think there's a central question which lurks under the surface. How do we think about the orientation of the learning ecosystem and the organization and financial model? Orientation, well, there are learning ecosystems which grow within the formal education system and are all about improving it. There are others which stand resolutely outside the formal education system and may not want much to do with it. And there are hybrids that want to do both. And whatever the orientation, there are different models. There's a consolidated model when government works very closely, often with one NGO, putting together funding. There is the NGO leads model, typically when the ecosystem stands outside the formal education system. And then there's a kind of disseminated model. Often in those parts of the world, I'm thinking of some parts of India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, where the formal system is least developed. And there you often see an amazing coalition of NGO and other partners. So I think until we've really figured out that taxonomy, and we're well on the way to it, as you can see, there'll be a question in policymakers' minds about exactly what they want to buy and for what purpose and how to get purchase on it. Back to you, Valerie.
Michael, I think we're done. I think we're now in the business of inviting colleagues who have been participants in this work to make their contributions. So thank you for listening to the overview. I encourage you to get hold of the report when it's available through LPI, which will be quite soon. So I think we're into our discussion.
Thank you, Valerie. So let me suggest in the remaining time, it's a little over 30 minutes, I think, that we structure our conversation around two pieces. In the first, I'd just like to talk to a couple of people who've been central to this work so far out in the world. To Ana Penido, Lehman Center, Brazil, an amazing learning ecosystem, building really the professional capacities, particularly of principals across Brazil. But also to Vishal Talreja, known to many of you, I'm sure, who's been central to the important work in Delhi itself of growing an ecosystem out of the formal school system. I hope that the two of them can give us some insight and a bit more color to what Valerie and I have been talking about. And then I'd like to broaden it out and invite a number of people with a perspective on this to throw in their thoughts and to make sure that anyone who wants to share ideas has a chance to do so before we close. So that's really the idea. And in talking to Anna and then to Vishal, I'd like to think forward, just to make sure that we have your perspectives on how this work might move forward. We're at the end, as I say, of the first year, the first phase, but we do have real aspirations to push on over the next 2 years into a further iteration of this work to get to a greater level of specificity and recommendation. So I hope Anna and Vishal, you could help us a bit with that. But Anna, if I could start with you, and you just think of what all the conversations we've had over recent months and what Valerie in particular has just been presenting. What do you hope might stimulate and catalyze learning ecosystems in Brazil, in Latin America, and around the world? What in this current research project do you see as having prospects for catalyzing further work around learning ecosystems? Anna.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. I wasn't expecting for the cold call, but let's see what I can share with you. So we now implementing this very large-scale program. We are training now 3,000 school leaders and education leaders in Brazil. And last year we started also a program, a fellowship program with senior educational leaders from Kenya and Pakistan. And what we've been realizing through these program, national and international programs, is that one of the key components of a real transformation in education is being able to empower leaders so they can really create powerful coalitions to address the many diverse and systemic problems that education in the global South face nowadays. So this study is helping us to really understand what the key elements are to turn these initial collisions into ecosystems that would really allow these leaders to tackle very challenging problems that they are facing in order to promote quality and equity, especially in public education, and really allowing children from underprivileged communities to have access to good education that is key for them to thrive. But you know, it's really interesting to understand that this national or local ecosystems would really benefit from us creating like a global South ecosystem, you know, allowing all these experiences to be shared, the learnings to be really used by different organizations and states throughout the world. So having this study and the opportunity to really gather all these initiatives that have been researched by you, and you know, just taking all these learnings and findings to other countries and organizations in Asia, Africa, Latin America would be really, really useful to create this sense of community and this more like global South ecosystem. I think it's going to be hard if we'll have to do it everything on our own. You know, I think that if we're together, we will go further.
Thanks, Anna. I mean, finding friends around the world is obviously going to be hugely important for your own ambitions and to make learning ecosystems really happen. But I just want to ask you one more thing, because you've already made amazing things happen in Brazil. What would be the real game changer for you? I mean, would it be the kind of research and evidence base that you don't yet have, although I know you are investing in that? Would it be a higher quality of dialogue with policymakers in the education world? What would really make a difference to you so that you could double the speed at which you grow all of this?
Michael, I think that in our last conversation, I think I raised this question that it's impossible to change policies without changing mindsets. And of course, the use of data evidence is important for that. But there's something else, I think. In our training programs, we are really creating a safe space for these community leaders, public policy leaders, decision makers to visit and revisit their own beliefs and values, to really make sure that all of them, for instance, have high expectations towards children's development, that they really believe that public education systems in the global south can work, that they believe that teachers, even though coming from not very good training programs, can be trained on the job to really make a difference in children's lives. So I would say that changing those key people mindsets is key for everything that comes after that. And again, of course, having a very multi-sectoral group of people working together, creating these powerful coalitions, using data to help them make good decisions, having the beneficiaries involved in the programs. You know, the students have to be heard, they have to participate, they have to co-create the changes that they want to see in their communities, in their schools. Though all these things are very important, but without changing people's mindset, they wouldn't be even, open to allow these things to happen, to foster these things. So we have to understand how to make it, how to change people's minds. We are now facing a very, great turmoil in Brazil, very polarized situation between very right-wing people trying to even create some sort of threat, to threaten our democracy here. And there are a lot of people, they are following these people, even though they are using fake news or very unreasonable arguments to try to convince them to join this very weird movements here. Without changing people's minds, without having this this opportunity to really allow people to see what has to be done, and how each one of them has to overcome their biases, their limitations, in terms of beliefs. It will be very hard to change things.
Thank you, Anna. So I want to come across to you, Vishal, if I may, in India. You've been central to this work as well over the last year, helping shape it, but in particular, in many ways, the driving force of the work in the Delhi school system to create an ecosystem built around a happiness curriculum. So Vishal, as you think ahead to the next phase of this work, and hear Anna's call really for a global community to move it all forward, what are your aspirations for that? What are you thinking of, and how might it work in practice?
Thank you, Michael. Again, I'm glad Anna went before me, so I got time to think about what I might want to say. But great to be connected to many friends here. I think one is, as we have seen in the study itself over the last year, that there are already thriving, vibrant, emergent learning ecosystems in many parts of the global south. We just saw a few regions, but many more are there. So that was a great revelation, that some outside the public education system, but some driven by the public education system, like in Delhi. Governments increasingly in the Indian context are recognizing that they don't have all the solutions. They're committed to bringing about change in the public education system, because I think they're recognizing that 80% of the children coming from adversity in public education systems in India are not learning, are not thriving, are not being prepared for this complex future that's already upon us. So they're seeking solutions, and the learning ecosystems approach seems to be an approach that's really working for them, inviting in nonprofit organizations, businesses, employers, academicians, researchers, including international collaborations like we have seen in Delhi, not just with the happiness curriculum, but even in the whole set of education reforms that Delhi has introduced. So there is an appetite for it. There is already innovation in place that's happening. The second is that we're beginning to see the donor community open up their thinking around this, from conventional approaches where you support a program, or intervention, or an idea over a period of time. Now, increasingly, donors are recognizing that if we have to solve some of these complex challenges in education, we need to come together. We need to find solutions that work together. And we need to recognize that each player in the ecosystem brings their own unique strengths, and we have to play to those strengths. We can't expect one organization or one policymaker or one department of education to have all the solutions. And we have to create spaces to fund these ideas. Many of them might not necessarily see results immediately, will take for change to happen 3 to 5 years, sometimes 7 years, like again we have seen in the Delhi ecosystem. So the Life Skills Collaborative, which is another example that we have highlighted in the research, is really a collaborative that was started by 4 donors coming together and saying, hey, we want to integrate the idea of life skills and social emotional learning in public education systems across the country. And then inviting 16 organizations to come together and supporting them financially with expertise to integrate and make this happen over a 3 to 5 year cycle. So my excitement is that the key players, which is the government and the donor ecosystem, are already opening up their thinking around a learning ecosystems approach. The nonprofit space has already been doing this work for many years in many of the global south systems, but doing it without the support of these 2 key stakeholders, and now that's coming in. So this could really be a force to reckon with as we look at moving forward in the next phase. And a key thing that Anna mentioned, and I close with that, is that solutions are available, innovations are available, funding is increasingly available, government buying is available. But at the core of it, what needs to change is mindsets. Mindsets across the entire learning ecosystem: parents, young people, community members, employers, policymakers, governments, and nonprofit spaces. The mindsets around what is the core purpose of education, and what does success mean in the 21st century, and how do we redefine success for children growing up today in a country like India or Brazil, and how this success will lead to a redefinition of the kind of societies that will emerge 20 years, 30 years from now. So the core ideas of thriving, flourishing, well-being is where a big push of advocacy is needed, where these conversations that we're having today are needed. And this is where creating this collaborative process where learning ecosystems can learn from each other, can share practices, can share frameworks, can learn to build assessment practices together, will really help us shift those mindsets. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal. Vishal, Anna, in a way, the ecosystems you've created, that you're leading in Brazil and elsewhere, and in India, are to do with a strengthening of the formal education systems that we have through unique partnerships and visionary ambitions. But just before we turn a corner into a wider range of voices, I'd like to see if we can play in a short video, also from Latin America, which is about a learning ecosystem that stands right outside the formal system, addressing different problems, peace building in a war-ravaged society, and solution creation for young people. So Leonora, I'm talking about Fundación Mi Sangre, led by Catalina Koch. Can you see if you can just play that in for us, and we'll get that broader perspective before we move on.
The level and complexity of the challenges that our society faces today are very high. This is why we need new generations to be empowered and to have the tools to transform these realities. Having an ecosystemic approach is critical to be able to have all the actors who influence the young people's experience, such as teachers, parents, community leaders, decision makers, and even others who have an influence in their experience, such as the media, entertainment, and others, should have the tools and the capacity to empower new generations to unleash their capacity to transform their realities. This is why an ecosystemic approach is so important. And also, as we work by weaving these ecosystems, learning is accelerated, and hence change is accelerated as well to be able to respond to the complex challenges that we have as a society.
Fundación Mi Sangre in Bogota, Colombia. So I'd now like to invite 4 quick contributions, if I may, from different places and perspectives around the world, and then we will open it up before we close. And first, though, I can see he's on his iPhone, so let's hope for the best. But Greg Bear in the USA. Greg, you've created Remake Learning there in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania. In a way, you've taken a formal school system in a post-industrial landscape in the west of the USA, and you've buttressed it with some remarkable innovations, ecosystemic innovations, which could be to do with bringing learning to people who never learned. It could be professional development. It might be just deepening the learning experience. But Greg is, having built that in the global north, here we are thinking about learning ecosystems emergent in the south. And I just wonder, from your perspective, what you're hearing here and what there is here that excites you. Greg?
And Michael, can you hear me?
Perfectly, thanks.
Perfect. Well, you can see I'm in the global north driving in the snow. So first, thank you. I want to underline 3 things, if I may, briefly. 1, mindsets, mindsets, mindsets. There's nothing that can happen unless we affect the mindsets and the emotions of our policymakers. No facts and evidence will get us to where we need alone. 2, I want to emphasize something to which Vishal alluded, but really emphasize this idea that when we talk about learning ecosystems, we're acknowledging the things that are already happening. I think it's important in these and other discussions that we acknowledge learning ecosystems are happening all around us, whether we do things or not. And the question for us is, how do we accelerate that? How do we help to spread that? How do we acknowledge what's already happening among all of these assets to which Valerie referred? And 3, as we think about policy, I think we have to get very comfortable with the idea that this is incredibly messy work. There is no one organization, as Valerie said. So you have multiple organizations, you have multiple leaders, you have multiple leadership changes, you have different types of words and language that people like to use to describe the work that they do. That's a very uncomfortable space to think then about policy that's packaged in pretty ways, because this is very messy, very ground level work. And it's important to acknowledge that as we think about the policy implications. The bottom line, this work completely excites me. I'm excited to have so many new cousins all around the world, and let's keep at this together.
Thank you, Greg. Perfect. I want to come now, if I may, to Sten Captain, who is in Tallinn in Estonia. Sten works in the Ministry of Education there. It's Estonia, I guess, in OECD terms, is Europe's top performing national education system, and Sten is the Director of Strategy and Innovation. But Estonia is also part of an OECD project we call Education for Human Flourishing, which is about putting new purposes, practices, and people into traditional education. So, Sten, from the point of view of a very developed system in the global north, hearing this commitment to ecosystemic work in the name of thriving or flourishing in the south, I just wonder what your perspective is.
Thank you, Michael, for this surprise of a question. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. You caught me a bit off guard. Let me think. I think in general, and this is something that we've discussed, a complex systems view is somewhere where I think we've all arrived, just because of the nature of the chaos that we see in our systems, and there's no simple way to get that under control. So
I tell you, one of the reasons I came to you, Sten, though apologies for not tipping you off beforehand, but was that Estonia has kind of led a technology approach to ecosystems. Just join everybody up with fantastic data in what's a relatively small community. I don't know what it is, Estonia, the population, but I guess it's between 1 and 2 million. And hey presto, you've got an ecosystem, not just a formal education system with buildings and professionals and learners. So that's quite a formal and technocratic and technological approach to an ecosystem. Whereas what we're hearing about, whether it's in Brazil or Delhi, and indeed in Indonesia and Africa, is something which is much looser, built around vision for thriving, and barely takes necessarily account of the developed system at all. So I'm just wondering whether you think there's anything to learn, let's say in Estonia, from that looser and more mission and values driven approach.
got it. Thank you for that, Michael. I think I'll be looking forward to seeing the report so I can see more about what the different ecosystems look like and what's going on more specifically, so I can kind of understand how we relate to what's being done elsewhere. But otherwise, you are correct. We are trying to incorporate non-formal education, informal education, and our approach is definitely very technology oriented, at least in some part. And I think Estonia is quite well known for being a digital forerunner and so on. So we try to make the best use of data that is available. And one of the big aims that we have, or one of the big projects that we're working on, is an education personalization project, with the aim of which is to basically have all these different educational experiences, be they in school, be they outside of school, come together and inform us about a child's progress, where it's easier for them to move forward, where it's more difficult, what are the challenges, and to really utilize big data in helping, first and foremost, in helping teachers as well. Because if we're looking for a more student-oriented approach to education, which is something that Estonia is looking to increasingly more head toward, we want to free up teachers' time from tasks that the teacher doesn't necessarily have to do, that are repeating and so on. So as to allow for the teacher to be able to spend as much focused time with a particular student. So in terms of your question, Michael, I really have to look into the projects more deeply to understand where the linking points are and where we're located.
Thank you, Sten. And one last voice, and then we'll throw it open, and that is to Eva, if I may, Eva Kaferman, who is with Big Change. I mean, in a way, Eva, Big Change set a ball rolling with the new education narrative, people, purpose above all, new practices. And I wonder whether you see these incredible stories of learning ecosystems in the South beginning to bring that to life. What were your reflections as you heard all that Valerie was talking about and our colleagues from around the world?
So thank you, first of all, Michael and Valerie, for presenting the research, and then also the other contributions, especially from Anna and Vishal, who are experiencing learning ecosystems in the Global South. So what I hear and what really resonates with the work we've been doing with the new education story that highlights the drivers for transforming education systems, is that we need to start with the purpose of education and our beliefs and values, and as many of you have already shared, mindsets, because this is the highest leverage point. From there, everything else follows. And if we don't start with having open conversations about the purpose of education, which can also change and shape new ways of how we talk about learning and learning ecosystems, nothing else will have an impact or change that will be long-term. Otherwise, we always move back to where we have started and where the paradigm we're operating from. So a lot of what I've heard, also in terms of learning from each other and creating this global South, but also global community of learning, is something that resonates a lot with what we've and many others, including a lot of people also here on the call, have contributed to a new education story and big change. And if there is 1 minute left, I would hand over to Eloise, who is also leading a, no, she's saying no. Okay, so then I'll hand back to you, Michael.
Thank you. Tantalizing refusal, Eloise, never mind, next time. But let's just throw it open for the last 4 or 5 minutes. There's been a lot of content here, but it's a chance just to contribute thoughts as they may have struck any of you. So who would like to grab the microphone before we close?
I see Pavel is signaling. Pavel is signaling, Michael.
Pavel, thank you. Over to you.
Yes, hello. First of all, big compliments to the team. It's an incredible effort and really important. As an enthusiast of research of learning ecosystems, I think this really advanced our understanding. I'm sorry I cannot turn on my video. My camera is not working right now. But anyway, what I want to say is that I feel that we are touching on an incredibly important subject, because the point is that we are facing right now the situation where most people think learning ecosystems are for global north, and that's where they should be situated. The global south seems to be excluded from that paradigm. In fact, we see here the opposite, that learning ecosystems are necessary solution for exactly the situation where we have institutional deficit. And that's what I see as one of the conclusions of this report. Now, I want to pose something as a couple of questions for the continuation of this research, which I think is really important to continue. One of them is the role of relationship between policymakers and ecosystemic leaders. Because in all cases that you observe, apparently, when you talk about adversity, is adversity of, for example, economic resources or and so on, but there is still support from policymakers. Now, if we think about places where, for example, right now I'm in Azerbaijan, nearby is Iran, and places like this, like places like Russia, China, where government actually often opposes the effort of educational innovators to create alternatives, how is it possible to operate in environments like this? Is it possible at all? That's the first question. Like, can you operate under the radar? Is it possible to still work in the context of learning ecosystems when you face the let's say, certain opposition from the government? And second question, which I feel is really important, is economic models, because that is something that we need to understand if we want to move forward. What are the dominating economic models? What are the possible economic models which create viable and scalable learning ecosystems? And that is what I hope we can research in the next stages of this work.
Thank you. Thank you, Pavel. I think we will. And a last word then for Francois, Francois Tadei. We'd really love your perspective on this before we close, Francois.
Thanks. I love ecosystems. I've studied some of the biological ones, and I love to see learning ecosystems thriving. And you know, having heard some of what has been said, I was wondering if we could, how do we help individuals to enter into a learning ecosystem mind frame? Because that has been said repeatedly that it is somewhat rate limited, and I think that the hero's journey might be interesting, because initially everyone starts in a normal situation, which is typically the siloed situation, and they might have frustration with this, and they might have see the interest of something else, but they have the fear of the new, which everyone has, and then at some point they cross the threshold, and then they start exploring what this means, what's a learning ecosystem, what are the actors of the learning ecosystems. And I guess at some point there is a sort of a personal transformation. Campbell told about rebirth, and that personal transformation then opens the possibility of transforming the way you interact with others, the way you interact within your organizations, with other organizations, within that ecosystem. And I think, once you've done this, you can start contributing actively to the evolution of the ecosystem, and you can start becoming a peer and a mentor, which are needed for others to join the ecosystem. And so I think if we manage to frame it like this, maybe we can try to find some components of what it takes for learning ecosystems to start to be exponential. Because if everyone that goes through the cycle can start inviting others to join the cycle, then that can grow and grow. And of course, the other things I wanted to add, which is basically what we're doing now, is what we're trying to do is connect local learning ecosystems to other ecosystem, and that in biology that's a very well-known meta ecosystem. So I think the more people do that journey locally, and then the more insights that were very nicely summarized by Valérie and the whole work that is being done, I think it can make it easier and less frightening to start a journey towards a learning ecosystem, so you can see new ones elsewhere. So I think we have to basically think of how can we make those exponential. One of the beauty of living systems is that they have these exponential properties built in. How do we get inspired by this and start thinking maybe the use of technology that typically is what we are doing now, connecting us from different parts of the globe, learning from each other, building this meta digital learning ecosystem. So I think we can maybe take further time to rediscuss this, but I was very inspired by the whole session to see this emerging resonance between the local learning ecosystems and these sorts of narratives. So thanks a lot for this wonderful session.
No, thank you, Francois. And that's a fantastic challenge for us to take into the phase 2 of this work, which is a lot to do with finding a way to talk about it and to bring a much bigger community with us. It's time to close. We're right up on the hour. So thank you, all of you, for being with us wherever you are. It's been wonderful to see old friends here and to meet new friends. And we look forward to holding this community together, if we may, as we evolve learning ecosystems over the years ahead. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.